What is this Bitcoin thing? You've probably heard of Bitcoin, maybe you've seen it in the news, you've seen a headline, you've probably heard about people getting rich from it, maybe you've heard also about people losing all their money on it. But what is it? What is Bitcoin? Well, let's take a look at the story so far. Bitcoin was born, so to speak, in 2008, on October 31st, in Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper. A white paper is basically like a report which very concisely details a vision or a philosophy or a proposal to some kind of solution to a question or a problem. So this was Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper, which was introducing the idea of Bitcoin to the world. Satoshi Nakamoto could be a person or a group of people, no one really knows, but that's kind of a different story for a different day. Satoshi's white paper introduced this idea of a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, the main benefits of which being that people would in future no longer need a bank to transfer currency to one another. So let's look at banks. Banks require trust, they charge you, they're often slow. And this Bitcoin network, this new idea that Satoshi Nakamoto came up with, would eliminate the need for this bank, this trusted third party, to authenticate transactions between you and me, between the merchant and the seller, between people and friends and family, business partners all over the world. So let's dive a bit deeper into that. If you want to send money, for example, from the UK to the US, something I attempt to do quite often, or vice versa, this is not an easy thing to do. It can take several days and it is expensive. But why? Why is it expensive? Why can I send an iMessage to Fiji, or I can email my cousin who's out on a cruise ship in the Pacific in literally a fraction of a second? But if I want to send or receive money to someone in a different country, it can take several days and I'm going to lose a fairly big chunk of that money in fees, currency conversion fees, like PayPal fees, sender fees, receiving fees. There's just fees everywhere. So by the time I get what's left, or that person gets what I've sent them, like 10%, 5-10% of it is often gone. Not only do banks charge high fees and are often very slow, they also lose hundreds of billions of dollars a year to fraud. Now, between the banks, the merchants, the customers, hundreds of billions of dollars, this is not small change here, is lost every year due to credit card fraud, bank fraud, all sorts of different types of fraudulent activities. And ultimately, it's us that pays that cost. We ultimately pay that cost for all this fraud which is going on within the banks. So back to the white paper. Bitcoin came about as a way of eliminating the needs for banks, and the philosophy is that it makes financial transactions faster, cheaper, more secure, and totally trustless. So you and I can make a transaction without any need for that third party to authorize that transaction, to authenticate it. There's not the risk that someone a few days later is going to actually, you can't have that money, it needs to go back again, which banks do have the power to do, although they would hopefully rarely use that power. Now, what's interesting about the date that this white paper was released or published was that it was right in the depths of the global financial crisis in 2008-2009. So in 2008, just to kind of recap, 11 years ago now, global stock markets plunged, asset values across the world plunged, and a lot of people lost a lot of money. Not everybody lost money. A small minority of bankers and traders made an absolute killing, became very rich. People who shorted the market, they made tons of money, and they did very well out of it. Now, what happened following this global crash 10, 11 years ago now was actually, unbeknown to Bitcoin at the time, about to make Bitcoin all the more relevant, interesting, and potentially valuable too. Now, it was the banks which arguably caused the global financial crisis by lending money to people who they knew would never be able to repay their debt. They gave 100% mortgages to people who had no savings at all, and given that it was their job to determine who was a safe person to lend to and who wasn't a safe person to lend to, basically they failed. They lent all this money to people who could never repay the debts. Guess what? They defaulted on the debts. The banks then defaulted on their debts. They went bankrupt, and we all know what happened next. Markets corrected, asset values plunged, all the stock indexes plunged, and people couldn't afford to pay their loans. The banks, which were the ones who were adding fuel to this bubble beforehand and ultimately caused the crash, went bankrupt. Now, what happened next was that the consensus from the global central banks like the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, the ECB, they're the ones who print your dollars, your pounds, your euros, your yen. They print your currency. They have a lot of power. And after the GFC, the global financial crisis, they communally decided to print trillions of dollars worth of currency and give that money to banks, bail the banks out, pay off their debts, and then try to get them to be lending money again. Now, here's what happens when a central bank like the Fed, the Bank of England, the ECB, prints all this currency. Basically what it does is it massively increases the supply of the money in circulation. So the United States printed trillions and trillions of dollars in 4 or 5 different bouts of what they call quantitative easing, which is basically money printing. And what that does is it increases the supply of dollars. Now, let's think about what effect that has. That makes the dollars in your bank account and my bank account worth less, because if there's more available, that makes the ones that are already in circulation less valuable. It makes the dollars in your pocket, the euros in your pocket, worth less. It's a bit like going out and buying a limited edition handbag, only 500 ever made, for then Hermes to then just spontaneously decide they're going to go and make another 10,000 of them just after you've bought it. Obviously that handbag is now going to be worth less. I'm sure they wouldn't do that because I guess they're a good company. But anyway, to recap, the global crash happened, the banks lost all their money, governments and central banks printed money to bail out the banks, which ultimately meant the money in your bank was worth less. Now, you've probably noticed that as time goes on, over the years, things seem to get more expensive, and it's not just that they seem to, they actually do. This is basically called inflation. Things which used to cost $1 5 or 10 years ago now cost $1.50. Things which cost $100 years ago now cost like $120, $150. You can't get as much for your money as you used to be able to. If you had the same £100 now, you can't buy the same with it as what you would have been able to have bought 10 years ago. So what's all this got to do with Bitcoin? Well, unlike your dollars, your pounds, your euros and yen, where a very small group of incredibly powerful central bankers can decide whether or not to print trillions or quadrillions or whatever of dollars or yen to kind of increase the money supply, Bitcoin is different. Bitcoin has a fixed supply. There are only 21 million Bitcoins ever to be available. Right now there are only 18 million, which leaves 3 or 4 million left to be mined. So the total cap, unlike your pounds and your dollars, of Bitcoin is capped at 21 million Bitcoins. Now, why is that good? Well, you see, if something is in a fixed or short supply, then it can become valuable. Let's take gold, for example. Why is gold so expensive? An ounce of gold, a tiny little lump of gold, is going to cost you something like $1,200 or $1,300. Why? It's just metal. Well, everyone believes that gold is valuable, and so it is. It has a fixed supply. Do you know how much gold there is in the world? Not that much. Question for you, how many Olympic-sized swimming pools do you think you could fill with all the gold in the world? 100, 200? It's actually 3. Or 3, actually it's 3.25. So all the gold in the world, every single scrap of gold across every country, including India, where a lot of gold is, China, Russia, all the gold in the entire world would fit into 3 and a bit Olympic-sized swimming pools. So when something is in short supply like that, it becomes valuable. Central bankers, governments can't just decide one day to create or magic out of thin air through some kind of alchemy the creation of hundreds of tons of new gold, but they can do this with dollars, yen, euros. So with central banks printing more of this currency every year, and to be honest, there's no sign of it slowing down, things like gold, Bitcoin, precious metals could become more valuable as time goes on. Could become more valuable. Notice I'm not saying they will, they could. So, where are we so far? 2008, Satoshi Nakamoto writes the white paper, which is an electronic peer-to-peer cash system, eliminating the need for slow, expensive, possibly untrustworthy banks to authenticate and authorize these transactions between people. A couple of months later, January 2009, the first Bitcoin is mined, which basically means that the first Bitcoin was put on the blockchain. Now, blockchain is also a word you've probably heard of, and I'm aware that we're going through this very quickly, but I want to keep this video short and concise, just in order to kind of share with you the story of Bitcoin so far, if you've got 10 years of catching up to do. So what is a blockchain and how does Bitcoin work? Well, you can literally spend years studying this, but in essence, Bitcoin uses cryptography and encryption to timestamp every transaction on the Bitcoin network. So if I transact to you, if I make a transaction, that block will contain my account number, your account number, some other information like the amount of Bitcoin I've sent, a couple of numbers to identify that that block belongs to a Bitcoin blockchain and not one of the other blockchains. It will contain hashes of the previous block and a few other things, but suffice to say that in every block there is some information, and that block will then get authenticated by the network, the whole system of computers all over the internet which agree that those transactions are valid and true. That block is then added to the end of the blockchain. Now, once a block has been added to the blockchain, that is final. This is what's special about blockchains. You can't go back and like change a block, 150 blocks ago and like alter the information in it. No, it's very secure, it's cryptographically encrypted, and the system doesn't allow any historical changes to the network. The Bitcoin network, the whole of it is decentralized and it's public. Anyone who runs a full node has the whole blockchain on their system and is constantly updating it with every new block. So the network is decentralized, which means it's not stored in any one place. You can't go and like send a missile into, a server in San Diego and then wipe out Bitcoin. It doesn't work like that. The Bitcoin network is stored on computers all over the world. It's in the public domain, and the blockchain is there for anyone to read. You can literally go through and read every transaction that's ever been made. If this makes absolutely no sense, don't worry. Very, 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 very few people are interested in this stuff. Even fewer of those understand it, and even fewer still understand it well enough to explain it. I don't consider myself an expert on this, but I'm trying. Look at the views on this video compared to this video. Nobody cares about Bitcoin. Nobody cares about blockchain. Not yet, anyway. Oh, one last thing, the price. 5 years ago, you could buy a Bitcoin for around $500. Today, May 2019, they're about $6,000, but they did get up to around $20,000 in December 2017. The price does go up and down a lot. It's fairly volatile. I'm releasing this video now whilst price is relatively low and stable, because I couldn't in good faith make this video if I thought we were in a bubble stage, like for example in late 2017. If you want to buy Bitcoin and you think I can't afford a Bitcoin because they're like $10,000 or $20,000 or whatever, you don't need to buy a whole one. You can buy a tiny, tiny fraction of a Bitcoin for just a few dollars. $100 will get you, a fraction of a Bitcoin. If you are interested, you can click the link in my description and comments. Remember, this is not financial advice. I'm just a guy on the internet. Do not buy what you cannot afford to lose. My name's Mike. I usually make videos about languages and travel. Obviously, this is something totally, completely different. Coming from a science background, I really do find this stuff really, really fascinating and interesting, and I hope you did too. If you didn't, well, thanks for watching anyway, and I hope to see you in the next video.